I remember the night vividly, the way the air buzzed with electricity and the promise of something grand. It was supposed to be a celebration, a surprise proposal party Nolan had orchestrated with meticulous detail. My name is Harper, and I had always prided myself on seeing the bigger picture both in my career as an urban planner and in life. But that night, everything I thought I knew began to unravel. The room was filled with laughter and the clinking of glasses, friends and family mingling under the soft glow of fairy lights. Nolan was the perfect host, charming and attentive, the kind of man everyone adored. His brother, Mason, was there too, lurking around the edges with a predatory gleam in his eyes. I had always found Mason a bit too slick, his ambition a little too raw. As I moved through the crowd, exchanging pleasantries and accepting congratulations, I noticed a folder on Nolan's desk, slightly ajar. Curiosity got the better of me. I glanced around to see if anyone was watching before quietly slipping it open. What I found inside stopped me cold. Blueprints. Not just any blueprints, but plans for a development that would bulldoze a historic district my family had fought for generations to preserve. My heart hammered in my chest, a mix of disbelief and anger swirling inside me. How could Nolan do this? Was this why he had proposed to use my family's influence for his gain? "Hey, you okay?" Fiona's voice cut through my spiraling thoughts. She was my best friend, always able to read me like a book. I forced a smile, hoping it was convincing. "Yeah, just a bit overwhelmed," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. But inside, a storm was brewing. Fiona nodded, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Well, if you need to talk, you know where to find me." I nodded, grateful for her support but knowing this was something I needed to handle on my own, at least for now. I closed the folder, my mind racing with possibilities and questions. Later, as Nolan stood to make a toast, his eyes found mine across the room. "To the future," he said, raising his glass, a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I forced myself to smile back, though my mind was elsewhere. Was this the beginning of a betrayal? Or was there something else at play? I needed answers, and I needed them fast. As the night wore on, I felt the weight of the blueprints in my mind, a silent promise to uncover the truth. Nolan's charm was a veil, and I was determined to see what lay beneath it. The stakes were higher than I had ever imagined, and the path ahead was fraught with uncertainty. Party began to wind down, but my resolve only hardened. I would find out what Nolan was hiding, and I would do whatever it took to protect my family's legacy. This was just the beginning, and I was ready for the fight. Little did I know, the truth would be far more complicated than I had ever anticipated. The next morning, a thick fog hung over the city, matching the haze of confusion in my mind. I decided to visit my mother, Lila, hoping her wisdom could help me navigate this mess. She was in the garden, pruning roses with a serene focus that belied the storm I was about to unload. "Morning, sweetheart," she greeted, her eyes softening as she caught sight of me. There was always something comforting about her presence, like stepping into a warm embrace. "Morning, Mom," I replied, trying to sound casual as I joined her. "Got a minute?" She set down her shears, sensing the weight in my voice. "What is it, Harper?" I hesitated, the words sticking in my throat. But I needed to say them. "I found something at Nolan's. Plans for a development. It could destroy the historic district." Lila's face tightened, her eyes narrowing slightly. "And Nolan's involved?" I nodded, the admission feeling like a betrayal in itself. "I do not know what to do. He has not mentioned anything, and I am torn." Lila sighed, her gaze drifting to the roses. "Our family has always stood for preservation, Harper. But confronting Nolan without understanding his motives could backfire. Be cautious." Her words were a balm, yet they also added to the pressure. My father, Theo, was still in the dark about this. He would be devastated if he knew, and I could not risk that until I had more information. Later that afternoon, as I returned to my apartment, I found Mason waiting for me. His presence was like a shadow, always lingering just out of sight. "Harper," he greeted, his smile too polished, too knowing. "What brings you here, Mason?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. He shrugged, feigning nonchalance. "Just thought I would drop by, to talk about the development. It is a big opportunity, and with your support, it could really take off." There it was, the pressure I had anticipated. Mason was the kind of man who played games, and I was not in the mood for it. "I am not sure it is something I can support," I replied, choosing my words carefully. Mason leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Come on, Harper. Think about what it could mean for you and Nolan. A fresh start. Progress." I forced a smile, though inside I was seething. "I will think about it," I said, knowing full well I had no intention of doing so. As Mason left, I felt the walls closing in. The stakes were higher than I had realized, and the lines between personal and professional were blurring dangerously. I needed to act, but the path was fraught with uncertainty. That evening, as I sat on my balcony, the city lights twinkling below, I knew I had to dig deeper. Whatever Nolan and Mason were planning, it was bigger than I had imagined. And I was determined to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. The night air was cool, but my resolve was burning. This was only the beginning, and I was ready for whatever came next. The air felt thick with tension as I sat at my desk. The blueprints I had copied from Nolan's folder spread out before me. Each line and measurement seemed to mock me, a reminder of the betrayal lurking beneath the surface of our relationship. I had to find out more, and I knew exactly where to start. I called Fiona, knowing she would have the resources and the tenacity to dig into the Hawthorne family's dealings. "Hey, can you meet me at the cafe near the office?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Sure thing, Harper." "Everything okay?" she replied, her concern evident even over the phone. "Yeah, just need your help with something," I said, hoping the urgency in my voice was enough to convey the seriousness without raising too many questions just yet. When Fiona arrived, I slid the blueprints across the table to her. She scanned them, her brow furrowing as she pieced together the implications. "This is huge, Harper." "Are you sure about this?" she asked, her voice low but intense. "I have to be," I replied, my resolve hardening. "I need to know what Nolan and Mason are really up to." Fiona nodded, understanding the unspoken request. "I will see what I can find out. But you have to be careful, Harper. This could get messy." As Fiona left, I felt a mix of gratitude and anxiety. I was pushing into dangerous territory, but I had no choice. My family's legacy was at stake, and I could not let it be destroyed by greed. Later that day, I returned home to find Nolan waiting for me, his expression unreadable. "We need to talk," he said, his voice carrying a weight that made my stomach churn. "About?" I replied, trying to keep my tone neutral as I set my bag down. He hesitated, a flicker of something, guilt perhaps, crossing his face. "Mason mentioned you were hesitant about the development. Is there something you are not telling me?" I met his gaze, my heart pounding. "I just have concerns, that is all. It is a big project, and there is a lot at stake." Nolan nodded, but his eyes held a question he did not voice. "I understand. Just know that I am doing this for us, for our future." His words were like a knife, twisting deeper with every syllable. I wanted to believe him, to trust that his intentions were pure, but the evidence suggested otherwise. I forced a smile, though it felt hollow. "I know. I just need some time to process everything." As Nolan left, I felt the walls closing in. The stakes were higher than I had ever imagined, and the lines between personal and professional were blurring dangerously. That night, as I lay in bed, unable to sleep, my phone buzzed with a message from Fiona. "You need to see this," it read, followed by a link to an article. My heart raced as I clicked it, revealing a web of connections between the Hawthorns and several questionable business deals. This was bigger than I had thought. The revelation hit me like a tidal wave, leaving me breathless. Crisis was deepening, and I was in the thick of it. But I knew one thing for certain: I would not back down. This fight was just beginning, and I was ready to face whatever came next. The days blurred into a whirlwind of tension and uncertainty. I found myself at the office, staring blankly at the project proposal I was supposed to be working on. My mind kept drifting back to the article Fiona had sent me. Connections between the Hawthorns and those shady deals were undeniable. But what did it mean for Nolan and me? I decided to meet Fiona again, hoping her insights could help me make sense of this tangled web. We sat in a quiet corner of the cafe, the hum of conversation around us creating a cocoon of privacy. "Did you find anything else?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady despite the anxiety gnawing at me. Fiona nodded, her expression serious. "There is more, Harper. It looks like Mason has been using Nolan as a front to push these deals through. Nolan might not even know the full extent of it." A flicker of hope sparked within me. Maybe Nolan was just a pawn in Mason's game. But if that was true, why had he not told me anything? Why would Nolan go along with it? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Fiona shrugged, her eyes filled with sympathy. Maybe he thought it was harmless, or maybe he felt he had no choice. Family can be complicated. Her words hit home, echoing the conflict that had been brewing inside me. I had always believed in the strength of family bonds, but now those very ties were threatening to unravel everything I held dear. As I left the cafe, my phone buzzed with a call from Nolan. My heart skipped a beat, a mix of dread and anticipation. "Hey," I answered, trying to sound casual. "Hey, can we talk? I feel like there is something between us lately," he said, his voice tinged with concern. "Sure, let us meet at the park," I suggested, needing the open space to clear my head. When we met, Nolan seemed more vulnerable than I had ever seen him. We walked in silence for a while, the tension between us palpable. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely audible over the rustling leaves. "I know things have been weird. I just want you to know I am doing this for us." I stopped, turning to face him. "Are you sure it is for us, Nolan? Or is it for Mason?" His eyes widened, surprise flickering across his face. "What do you mean?" I took a deep breath, the weight of my words heavy in the air. "I know about the deals, Nolan. I know Mason is using you." He looked away, his jaw tightening. "It is not like that, Harper. I am trying to prove myself, to show that I can stand on my own." The raw honesty in his voice caught me off guard. Maybe he was trapped just like me. But that did not change the fact that our future was built on shaky ground. As we stood there, the distance between us felt insurmountable. I realized that protecting my family's legacy meant confronting Nolan, even if it meant losing him. The stakes had never been higher, and the path ahead was uncertain. But I knew one thing: I could not let the past dictate my future. It was time to take control, to fight for what truly mattered. And whatever happened next, I was ready to face it head-on. Community meeting was looming, and with it, the moment of truth. I had spent countless hours polishing my proposal, each word carefully chosen to highlight the historical significance of the threatened district. But beneath my determination lay a gnawing fear. What if it was not enough? The day before the meeting, I found myself at the family home, seeking comfort in the familiar. My father, Theo, was in his study, engrossed in a set of architectural plans. I hesitated at the door, unsure if I should involve him now. But the weight of the secret was becoming unbearable. "Hey, Dad," I greeted, stepping into the room. He looked up, his face lighting up with a warm smile. "Harper, what brings you here?" I took a deep breath, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "I need to talk to you about the development plans Nolan is involved in." Theo's smile faltered, replaced by a look of concern. "What about them?" "They threaten the historic district," I said, my voice trembling. "I found out Nolan might be using our connections to push it through." Theo leaned back, his expression unreadable. "And what do you plan to do?" "I am presenting a proposal at the community meeting," I replied, my resolve hardening. "But I am worried. Nolan might try to discredit me." Theo nodded slowly, a flicker of pride in his eyes. You are doing the right thing, Harper. Our legacy is worth fighting for. As I left his study, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. But the path ahead was still fraught with uncertainty, and I could not shake the feeling that something was about to go terribly wrong. That evening, Nolan called, his voice strained. I heard you are planning to present at the meeting. I hesitated, the tension between us palpable. Yes, I am. Harper, you know how important this is to me, he said, a hint of desperation in his tone. Can we talk before you do anything drastic? I agreed, knowing we needed to clear the air. We met at a quiet cafe, the atmosphere thick with unspoken words. Why are you doing this? Nolan asked, his eyes searching mine. Because it is the right thing to do, I replied, my voice steady. This is about more than just us, Nolan. It is about preserving what matters. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. I never wanted it to come to this. I thought we were on the same side. Are we? I shot back, the words sharper than intended. I need to know if I can trust you. Nolan hesitated, a shadow passing over his face. There are things you do not understand, Harper. Things Mason has kept from me, too. His admission took me by surprise, a new layer of complexity to an already tangled web. But before I could press further, my phone buzzed with a message from Fiona. Urgent. Call me. I excused myself, stepping outside to call her. What is it? I found something, Fiona said, her voice urgent. Mason is planning to announce a new investor at the meeting. Someone with deep pockets and a reputation for demolishing historic sites. The revelation hit me like a punch to the gut. This was bigger than I had imagined, and the stakes were higher than ever. I needed to act, and fast. As I rejoined Nolan, the weight of the decision ahead pressed down on me. I was on the edge of a precipice, and the next step would determine everything. But one thing was clear, I could not back down now. Whatever the cost, I had to fight for what was right. Community Hall buzzed with anticipation as people filled the seats, the air thick with the kind of tension that precedes a storm. I stood at the back, clutching my proposal like a lifeline, my heart pounding in my chest. This was it, the moment everything could change. Fiona was by my side, offering silent support. You got this, she whispered, squeezing my arm. I nodded, though my confidence felt paper-thin. As the meeting began, I watched Mason take the stage, his presence commanding and assured. He introduced the new investor, a man with a reputation for raising history in favor of profit. Crowd murmured, some nodding in approval, others frowning. When it was my turn, I stepped to the podium, my legs shaky. Thank you for the opportunity to speak, I began, forcing my voice to remain steady. I want to talk about what we stand to lose if we go forward with this development. I laid out my proposal, highlighting the district's historical significance and the potential for sustainable redevelopment. As I spoke, I felt the weight of every eye in the room, the pressure mounting with each passing second. But just as I was gaining momentum, Nolan stood up. I have to disagree with Harper's assessment, he said, his voice smooth and confident. This development is a chance for growth, for new opportunities. His words sliced through me, each one a betrayal. I could see the doubts spreading through the crowd, the support I had hoped to rally slipping away. Desperation clawed at me as I tried to regain control. Please listen to what we risk losing, I urged, but the tide was turning and I was being swept away. After the meeting, I stumbled outside, the cool night air doing little to soothe my racing heart. Nolan followed, his expression a mix of regret and resolve. Harper, I had to, he said, his voice low. You did not have to do anything, I shot back, the words sharp and bitter. You chose this. He reached for my hand, but I pulled away, the chasm between us widening. I thought you understood, he said, his voice breaking. Maybe I did, I replied, my voice cracking under the weight of my emotions. But I cannot stand by and watch everything I care about be destroyed. As Nolan walked away, I felt the full weight of my decision crashing down on me. I had risked everything, and it seemed I had lost. My family's legacy, my relationship with Nolan, it all felt shattered beyond repair. Back inside, Fiona found me, her expression grim. "I am so sorry, Harper," she said, her voice full of sympathy. I nodded, the words sticking in my throat. "I thought I could fix this," I whispered, the enormity of my failure settling in. But just as I was about to give in to despair, Theo approached, his presence a steadying force. "You did what you had to do," he said, his voice firm. "But was it enough?" I asked, the doubt creeping in. Theo looked at me, his eyes filled with a quiet determination. Sometimes doing what is right is more important than winning. His words were a balm, though they did little to ease the ache in my heart. I was at my lowest point, the path ahead obscured by uncertainty and loss. But somewhere in the darkness, a flicker of hope remained, a reminder that the fight was not over yet. The day of reckoning had arrived, and the air was thick with anticipation as I walked into the community center. The hall was packed, the buzz of conversation underscoring the gravity of the moment. This was it, the showdown that would determine the fate of the historic district and, in many ways, my own future. Nolan was already there, standing beside Mason. His face was a mask of composure, but I could see the tension in his posture, the way his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. Mason, on the other hand, exuded confidence, his eyes scanning the room like a predator surveying its prey. As I took my place at the front, I felt the weight of every eye on me. This was my chance to make things right, to fight for what truly mattered. My heart pounded in my chest, a drumbeat of determination. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mason began, his voice smooth and commanding. "Today we have the opportunity to transform this community, to bring it into a new era of prosperity." His words were met with a mix of applause and murmurs of dissent. I knew I had to act quickly before the momentum swung completely in his favor. I stepped forward, my voice clear and strong. "Before we make any decisions, I urge you to consider what we stand to lose. This district is more than just buildings. It is our heritage, our history." Nolan's eyes met mine, a flicker of something, guilt perhaps, crossing his face. But he remained silent, his loyalty to Mason holding him back. As I continued, I felt the energy in the room shift. People were listening, really listening. I could see the doubt in their eyes, the uncertainty that Mason had tried so hard to quash. But just as I was gaining ground, Mason interrupted, his tone dripping with condescension. "Harper, with all due respect, progress requires sacrifice. You of all people should understand that." His words stung, but I refused to back down. "Sacrifice is one thing. Destruction is another," I countered, my voice unwavering. Tension in the room was palpable, the air crackling with unspoken conflict. I could feel the weight of the decision bearing down on me, the enormity of what was at stake. Then, in a move I had not anticipated, Nolan stepped forward. "Harper is right," he said, his voice steady but filled with conviction. "There are ways to move forward without erasing our past." Mason's eyes widened in disbelief, his composure cracking. "What are you doing?" he hissed, his voice low and dangerous. Nolan turned to face his brother, his expression resolute. "I am doing what I should have done from the start, standing up for what is right." The room erupted in whispers, the balance of power shifting before my eyes. Nolan's unexpected defection had thrown Mason off balance, and I seized the opportunity to press my case. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice rising above the din, "we have a choice. To build a future that honors our past, or to let it be buried beneath concrete and steel." As the room quieted, I felt a sense of clarity wash over me. This was about more than revenge or justice. It was about doing what was right, no matter the cost. The vote was cast, and the decision was made. The development would be halted, the district preserved. Relief flooded through me, a wave of triumph tempered by the knowledge of what had been lost along the way. As the crowd dispersed, Nolan approached, his expression a mix of regret and resolve. "I am sorry, Harper," he said, his voice tinged with sincerity. "I should have stood by you from the beginning." I nodded, the path to forgiveness still uncertain but not impossible. We all have choices to make, I replied, the weight of the words settling between us. In that moment, I realized that the fight for preservation was just the beginning. The real challenge lay in rebuilding trust, in forging a future that honored the past without being shackled by it. And as I looked around at the faces of those who had stood with me, I knew that whatever came next, I would not face it alone. The dust had finally settled, both literally and figuratively. The historic district was safe, its cobblestone streets and aging facades a testament to the resilience of history. As I walked through the neighborhood, the weight of the past few weeks began to lift, replaced by a sense of accomplishment and clarity. I found myself at the old family office, the place where my journey had begun. Inside, the familiar scent of aged wood and paper greeted me, a comforting reminder of my roots. Theo and Lila were there, their faces reflecting a mix of pride and relief. "You did it," Theo said, his voice filled with emotion. "You stood up for what was right." I nodded, the enormity of it all still sinking in. "I could not have done it without you," I replied, my heart full. Lila stepped forward, her eyes shining with warmth. "Your grandfather would be so proud, Harper. You honored his legacy." As we shared a quiet moment, I realized that the fight had been about more than just buildings. It had been about preserving the stories and memories that made us who we are. Later, as I prepared to leave, I noticed a small envelope tucked into one of the drawers. My grandfather's handwriting was unmistakable. I opened it, my heart skipping a beat at the sight of his familiar scrawl. "Dear Harper," it began, "remember that true strength lies not in holding on to the past, but in knowing when to let go and embrace the future." His words resonated deeply, a reminder that forgiveness and growth were as much a part of our legacy as the buildings themselves. With renewed purpose, I headed to the park where Nolan had asked to meet. The air was crisp, the sun casting a warm glow over the autumn leaves. When I arrived, he was already there, his expression a mix of hope and uncertainty. "Harper," he began, his voice tentative, "I wanted to say I am sorry. For everything." I studied him, the sincerity in his eyes undeniable. "I know," I replied, my voice soft. "We both made mistakes." He nodded, a flicker of relief crossing his face. "I want to make things right. To start fresh, if you are open to it." I considered his words, the path to forgiveness still uncertain but not impossible. "I think we can try," I said, a small smile tugging at my lips. "But it will take time." As we talked, I felt the tension between us ease, replaced by a tentative understanding. The road ahead was still uncertain, but I knew we would face it together, one step at a time. As I walked away, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The fight had been worth it, not just for the district, but for the lessons learned along the way. My journey had taught me the true meaning of legacy, of balancing the past with the future. And as I looked back one last time, I knew that whatever came next, I was ready to embrace it, armed with the knowledge that sometimes the greatest victories are those that come from within.